Britain takes control of the war. In large part because the colonists were such ineffective and difficult allies, Anglo-American forces did not fare well in 1756 or 57. During the summer and autumn of 1756, while British and colonial officers argued over authority and rank in their combined forces, the French went on the offensive, capturing Fort Oswego and 1,500 provincials on Lake Ontario, and ravaging English frontier settlements from New York all the way down to the Carolinas. Even after Oswego fell and the French seemed to be preparing to attack Fort William Henry on Lake George, the colonists remained more concerned with establishing the independence of their assemblies than defending New York. So it had become a massive preoccupation. Everyone quit arguing about the war and how to fight the war and what to do in the war, and it became, how do we administer the war? What's the bureaucratic way we should go about it? Who should be in charge of what? And they started ignoring the war effort itself. And the French went on the attack. Loudon concluded, Loudon was the British commander-in-chief, Earl of Loudon, concluded that the colonists could not be depended on to win the war, and that he would have to rely on regulars recruited in Britain to mount the offensive needed to capture Louisbourg and Quebec and end the war in 1757. It's always, how do we end it this year? Yet recruiting an additional 11,000 men in Britain, particularly while the government and its policies were unsettled, doing this, getting 11,000 men, took time. And when at last these reinforcements reached Loudon, it was too late for him to act decisively. By 1757, the French government had so strengthened its naval forces off Cape Breton as to forestall an attack on Louisbourg or Quebec, and to release some troops from Canada for an offensive in New York. So the French step up the naval situation. On August 9th, the French captured Fort William Henry on Lake George, which they looked like they were planning to, and they did, and they threatened to occupy the upper Hudson. Holy crap! So it was that Anglo-Americans had managed to squander superior resources for 2 campaigns and to suffer a succession of depressing defeats. It looks like the people lack the resources to win against the French and the Indians, and the resources which are possessed by the British government. The British government lacks the resolve. They don't even get what the real war aims would be. Okay, Anglo-American failures in the opening campaigns of the French and Indian War should not be attributed entirely to their difficulties in raising an army. Right? There was more involved than that. It was just squibbling and bad planning and not paying attention. The British also had trouble during these first campaigns in taking advantage of the superiority of their navy. Canadians had stepped up their power and had actually stopped British plans because of this. So about the British superiority of their navy. Gaining and keeping control of the seas off New England and New France. They had trouble gaining and keeping control of these waters. As in earlier colonial wars, the British were more concerned with establishing their superiority in the English Channel than with protecting their possessions overseas. That's where the policymakers were. That's where the policymakers were. And in establishing themselves in the Channel was not easy, because the French had rebuilt their fleet since the War of the Austrian Succession and refused to risk that fleet in major engagement. So the French wouldn't even stand and fight. And they were harassing the British as much as they could, and they had a large fleet. Thus, to defend the British Isles, to contain commerce raiders, and to protect their colonies from roving French squadrons, the British concentrated on blocking French ports. This strategy was not uniformly successful at the beginning of the war. In 1755, 2 French fleets eluded British squadrons and reached Canada with the reinforcement of 4,000 men. And by June 1757, the French had collected 18 ships of the line and 3 frigates at Louisbourg, giving them temporary control of Canadian waters and frustrating Loudon's plans for a summer offensive towards Quebec. Ironically, while the British were struggling to exploit their sea power and were learning not... Now remember, they're they're building in their naval powers. Their naval power is coming up in the world, but they are not yet the world's only naval power. So they didn't yet know how to act like they were. So they're struggling to exploit their sea power, and they were learning not to depend on the colonists to win the war. They were learning they're going to have to do it from London. They were coming to accept the colonial aims of taking the whole damn place, not just defending the frontiers. William Pitt, who became the king's principal minister in December 1756, was not to be satisfied with sustaining the boundaries of British North America. Believing that Britain's power depended on trade and colonies, Pitt shared the colonists' enthusiasm for conquering Canada and expanding the British Empire into the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. He was therefore prepared to put greater resources into the war in America than his predecessors, and he pressed Loudon to use those resources decisively to take Louisbourg and Quebec and conquer Canada in 1757. When Loudon failed to attack Louisbourg, Pitt was determined to take control of the war in 1758. Now, part of the reason was because of the buildup of the French Navy. So he's like, all right, damn it, I'm going to go take control of the war myself. To overcome the colonists' reluctance to serve by paying for some of the troops they would raise, and to encourage his own officers to be more aggressive and obedient by recalling Loudon and sending 2 promising young men to command in America. So he sends Jeffrey Amherst, and then it gives like a half page on Jeffrey Amherst. You can look him up. Now, this isn't a regular war of just taking territory. There is a few key sites. So there's going to be a war of sieges and maneuvers going to be going around. Now, it says about Jeffrey Amherst some stuff about him. Then it says he had the patience, the prudence, and the persistence. Patient, prudence, persistence, that sounds like what you need for a siege, right? He had these things not just to prefer, he liked siege war, but also to succeed in a war of sieges and maneuvers. Just once more real quick with no interruption. He had the patience, prudence, and persistence, not just to prefer, but also to succeed in a war of sieges and maneuvers. And this other guy, James Wolfe, who you can look up on your own as well, they sent them, and it says about him, just the end of his bio here, above all, he regarded battle as the supreme test of his personal courage and professional competence. Nothing, he thought, was more rewarding than having the mastery of men under fire, and being recognized for having that mastery. Not just being good at it, but getting medals and stuff too. He acknowledged the importance of fortifications and sieges, right, as Jeffrey Amherst, but he preferred the higher risks and greater potential rewards of battle as the arbiter of wars and reputations. In choosing Amherst and Wolfe to provide strong leadership in building up a decided superiority in regular units, and in granting large subsidies to encourage the colonists to serve as provincials, bribe them with money, William Pitt believed he was creating Anglo-American forces capable of conquering New France, perhaps in 1758. Amherst and Wolfe would lead the largest and most important of 3 coordinated offensives. An amphibious attack on Louisbourg and Quebec, carried out by more than 13,000 regulars, supported by nearly 40 warships, 15,000 sailors, and 110 transports. It's quite an endeavor. James Abercrombie would make a secondary attack, number 2, across Lake Champlain to Montreal, with combined forces of more than 20,000 regulars and provincials. And John Forbes would lead about 6,000 men, mostly provincials, against Fort Duquesne, which someone's told me is Duchesne, D-U-Q-U-E-S-N-E, against Fort Duchesne. Although Pitt had not selected Abercrombie and Forbes, I thought it was Abercrombie and Fitch, Abercrombie and Forbes to serve in America, and although it was not clear how effective they or their provincial allies might be, Anglo-American forces were everywhere expected to be larger and better supported than the French. It was not just that there would be 23,000 regulars and 21,000 provincials, 40 warships, 15,000 seamen to oppose all that, 23,000 plus 21,000, plus a bunch of seamen. to support 6,800 French